coronavirus pandemic has tested our resilience and continues to do so. Well, there are financial challenges every household is grappling with over the last few months, and with plummeting fixed income rates and soaring gold prices, the traditional Indian family is today a confused lot. So, how does one succeed in moving forward in the new normal world and find the balance in terms of financial discipline as well as the financial freedom and success? How can families discover their own victory projects? Well, to talk about this, I'm extremely pleased to welcome two very shrewd minds in Indian investment and financial world. First up, Saurabh Mukherjee, founder of Marcellus Investment Managers, and Saurabh is also the author of the famous book, the best-selling book, Coffee Can Investing. Saurabh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thanks for inviting us.
And I also would love to welcome Anupam Gupta, investment research consultant and a popular podcast host. Anupam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you. Thank you for having us and looking forward to this. Thank you.
Right. So Saurabh and Anupam are all set to launch what promises to be another bestseller. It's already a bestseller. I just got to know this morning when I was reading one of those posts of Saurabh, Victory Project, 6 Steps to Peak Potential. So I need to come to both of you first. It's a very interesting name, Victory Project. There's some fantastic lessons from that book. I was pretty lucky to be reading that book well before the market gets to read it. Isn't that more significant in today's world than ever before? Anupam, I need to come to you on that one first because, there is a need for Victory Project today than ever before.
There is, isn't it, Rajesh? These are very adverse times. And as one of our guests put it very eloquently in a recent YouTube video, Manish Sabharwal, the co-founder of Team Lease, he said that we are all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So this pandemic has hit, the entire world, and all of us are dealing with it on our own. Thankfully, the framework that we're presenting in this is something that is pandemic-proof, so to say, not in the healthcare sense of it, but in the learning sense of it. It is something that can walk you through, the entire course and still come out thriving out of it. So that's it from my side. Saurabh.
Is that why, Saurabh, I just need to come to you on that point. Is that why you've also emphasized, because you did address the point of not necessarily pandemic proof in healthcare sense, but you also emphasize in your book itself saying building a portfolio that lasts forever, right? You've used the storytelling approach as well. So portfolios last forever, don't they?
Right. So if you actually, if I can be allowed to share a couple of slides, if you just enable me to share, I'll sort of illustrate as to why, whilst the book is obviously very relevant in the post-COVID landscape that all of us are living through, in a way, for many of us, right, for many of us who've lived relatively difficult lives, we've always had to think about long time horizons. Because if you've grown up in, say, 80s India, where socialism was the order of the day, you come from very humble middle class beginnings, you sort of fought your way up in the world. And then I also come from an immigrant family. We migrated to the UK when I was very young. My wife and I migrated back to India. So we've constantly had to think about our life's goals in terms of what are the basics that we can do, which will give our family security, which will make sure that the day-to-day, the food is on the table, so to speak. How can we then overlay, once we build the basics, how can we then build a layer of stability in our lives? And then once the stability is achieved, is there space for doing a couple of things which we might call ambitions? Perhaps a holiday cottage in the Himalayas, maybe a villa in Goa. Those haven't happened, by the way, yet, but those remain ambitions, right? And this sort of paradigm, right, the pyramid paradigm with security at the bottom of the pyramid, stability at the next layer of the pyramid, and then ambition at the right at the top, was a paradigm that I'd seen in a book by a gentleman called Ashwin Chabra called The Aspirational Investor. That formed the book. That paradigm formed a big part of my previous book, Coffee Can Investing. So 2 years ago, when Anupam and I started working on this book on the Victory Project, which has been published this week by Penguin, that pyramid came back. And we said that pyramid that we use in the context of our personal finances, can we also apply that pyramid to our broader lives? Right? Can we, in terms of our skill sets, our careers, our relationships, can we build a basic foundation around getting the simple things right, around specializing in core skill sets, perhaps building a degree of spirituality in our lives. And then once that basics are in place, can we then bring the next layer, which is say creativity and collaboration. And if we can bring the pyramid together, we felt, and we call the pyramid the simplicity paradigm, then both on the financial front and on the professional fulfillment front, putting ourselves on a strong wicket. So if you're allowed to just share some slides, I'm happy to show some
Oh,
illustrations
yes,
of this.
please. Absolutely, absolutely. Just coming back to that same point that you made, Saurav, and I'll bring Anupam here as well. So, the four principles very heavily talked about in the book, right? One is simplicity, then specialization, creativity, and collaboration. They're all in many ways tied together, right? I mean, people usually miss out on one of the elements. That's why the whole thing falls apart. So, how important is it for the cohesiveness to be there with these four principles?
Okay, I'll take that first. So, Rajesh, I think so. We like to think of it as a step-by-step mechanism, although the first slab, which is specialization, simplification, and spirituality, are really the starting points. So you can't just jump, say, to something like a declutter or something like a collaboration before building the basic blocks. And the reason why we're saying the building blocks is because these are first principles. We've met a wide variety of people for the purposes of this book. We've also read a lot, and we believe that you need to start from here. After all, if, say, for example, if you seek out the best of minds, or you seek out a mentor, or you seek out a team before first implementing the basic principles, then that might not give you the desired result that we are talking about. And we have so many examples in the book that we can talk about. I'll give you one. Ramdev ji, who's actually the co-founder at Motilal Oswal, he's a great example of this. He's someone who comes from a very humble background, didn't even know how to talk in English properly. But he knew two things for sure at a very early age. So the first thing was that he knew he wanted to be rich. And that's a theme that you will see a lot in a lot of successful people. I think Jack Ma of Alibaba had also said that I've seen poverty and I never want to go there again. So you start from there, you decide that I want to be seriously rich and I want to do it in one way and one way only, that's investing. So there you have it. You've got simplicity, you've got specialization. And from there, everything he did was a logical sequence. He found a mentor in the form of Sanjay Bhattacharya, and then Warren Buffett also, and he took those learnings to create this vast body of knowledge that then helped him to invest in great companies and take very large bets. Now, that is not something that you would want to do without going through the first layer itself. So that's why the sequence is important. Sorry.
Absolutely. Saurav, you want to add to that point? Because I also want to bring one element here that Anupam brought in, was also evidently there in your book. Habits form 40% of decision making. So when you put the structure together, it's also about habit formation, isn't it?
So one of the reasons we wrote the book was we told ourselves that suppose we became we were suddenly transported back in time and we were 20 years younger. What would be the book that we could read in our early 20s, which would give us the roadmap to doing justice to whatever talent we might have, right? And we reflected on our own lives. We reflected on the lives of other great people like Ramdev Agarwal ji, like Mark Mobius, like Sanjeev Bikhchandani of InfoEdge, like Manish Sabarwal of Team Lease in University, Bangalore. And we looked at their lives, we looked at our lives, and that's when this construct came together. We said that the basics are around. Figure out what you want to specialize in. Build a routine, build a sequence of steps that your life takes every day as you develop your specialization. Start thinking of simplification principles, right? Great simplification is always the mark of a very advanced level of thinking. And then to help you build mental resilience for the long haul, start cultivating a layer of spirituality. By this, there is no reference to religion, by the way, in our book.
Absolutely.
We mean spirituality in the sense of understanding that the world does not revolve around me, myself, and everything that I need for my personal fulfillment. The realization that my friends, my family, my community actually matters more. It's a very powerful realization because it allows you to step back and see things far more objectively. And it allows you to basically form a bridge between your skills today and the the judgments you need to make about tomorrow. Whether you as a businessman or I as an investor, all of us are making judgments about tomorrow. Yet there are no future facts. Right? There are no facts
Right.
about tomorrow that will help us inform. The only way I can make those judgments is if I'm in an objective frame of mind about the world I live in, rather than constantly saying, well, how much will Saurabh get out of the book or out of this discussion, right? As soon as you start looking inward, you lose objectivity. So
Absolutely.
I wish,
Great point.
I wish in our 20s, somebody had given us these basics around simplicity, spirituality, and specialization. It would have made our 30s and 40s far happier, far successful, perhaps.
I think it's still far happier and far more successful, that's for sure, Saurabh. But there's also a very important point that you brought up in the book itself, the importance of connecting with inner self. I know Anupam took the example right now of Jack Ma or Ramji Agarwal and all these great personalities. I think one of the key things for them was connection with inner self, right? It beautifully ties in here, right?
Absolutely. So that was actually the hardest chapter to write. We dwelled long and hard whether we write chapter 4, connecting with your inner self. I remember Anupama we must have met for I think 7 or 8 heavy coffee drinking sessions as we agonized about, do we write about our inner self? And I think what finally convinced us that it is worthwhile doing it was the movie Fight Club. So the movie Fight Club, I watched it 20 years back. It was all part of our youth. And in that movie, right, there's a lovely phrase that Brad Pitt, who plays the main protagonist in Fight Club, says. He says, "We are the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war." Now, if Brad Pitt is fighting a spiritual war in Fight Club, I think at some level we are all doing so, right? We can sort of amplify it or reduce it.
My favorite, so my favorite quote from that same movie, because that movie and the book, of course, because it's a very famous book by Chuck Palahniuk. I'm sure that you would have read it. Is that the things that you own end up owning you? So that was one of the quotes from the book and from the movie. Saurabh, go on. Sorry.
And again, Rajesh, I think one link to draw here is between this point, Anupam, between frugality and then to your personal finances. Right? Remember, in your personal finances, the personal finances, the book says, get your basics sorted out, build stability in your life, build security in your life, and then aim for the luxuries, the ambitions, right? So frugality actually, which is part of the spirituality chapter, actually links very nicely to chapter 9, which is on your personal finances. So the link between spirituality and your finances actually is deep, right? If you fill your life with all sorts of clutter, right, you'll obviously burn a lot of money. That money is not going to compound for you. As an investor, I love compounding, as you can understand. If you waste your money on frivolous stuff, your compounding gets arrested, and then when the time comes in life where you want to spend on your ambitions, you realize you don't have the money. Right, so in an astonishing way, financial fulfillment links to the spiritual aspect of the book in a fundamental manner, which even we hadn't realized until we were in the final fag end of writing the book.
I guess it's all about going back to the lessons we all learned. I still remember my dad teaching me those lessons, right? I mean, be judicious, be prudent, don't waste, right? I mean, those probably fell into deaf ears in those days, and we realize the importance of it today. A COVID pandemic makes us realize even more. Right. Yeah. So, Anupam, I just want to come back, but it's a great point that we are trying to make about frugality and all these elements. But what we have seen in India, essentially, even when it comes to investing, or trying to earn returns, right? The whole fear and greed principle. We talk about the fear and greed principle, right? But I have not seen many people in India, I mean, whether it's in stocks or any of the asset classes, I have seen very few actually buying the fear and selling the greed. It's actually the opposite. And then the financial mistakes creep in, and, then they start leaving the system. It goes complete circle.
So, great question, Rajesh, because I've had a podcast now I've done 250 episodes of the Personal Finance Podcast. I've met people I've traveled to Delhi, I've traveled to Bangalore, I've met, God knows, so many people. So I'll start with what I find the good part. The good part is the awareness today is much more than what it was when I was young. So for someone who's in his 20s or in his 30s even, the body of knowledge available for him now to make those decisions is much more than what it used to be before. The bad part, and this is where our book comes in, is that we love to clutter it all up. Now that we've got so much of information from all sources, we now want to create a very a very complicated portfolio, so to say. So, for example, market goes down, let me buy. And statistics have shown that in this downturn, the brokerage account with Zerodha, the trading that was done has just shot up. And you'll find that anecdotally also. For some reason, people have got the risk appetite and the money to invest during this downturn. We just don't believe in that, and Saurabh will underscore this point because we've written extensively on this, that have a system and have a framework. We've dedicated an entire chapter to this and build your investments in that way. So it doesn't really matter whether the market is at a high, which it was in Jan or Feb, or at a low, which it was in March. Why should your decisions be driven by what the market does? If you have a simple structure in place, again, the principles of simplicity, and if you've got your goals in place, very simple, again, spirituality to some extent, then build a framework that will last you forever and build a portfolio with that. I can relate my own example. I did nothing except let my SIPs run. I didn't increase the amount of SIPs. I didn't reduce the amount of SIPs. I just didn't do anything. And that gave me a lot of time to focus on on other things that I want to do. Honestly,
Right.
Whether the Nifty is at 7,500 or at 12,000, it doesn't really matter if you're looking at a 20-year horizon. So
Right.
to answer your question, yes, it is difficult, but we've said, we've spent two years researching this entire thing and saying that it doesn't have to be difficult.
No,
I'll let Saurabh take it from here.
Great point.
Go on,
I
Rajesh.
just asked that question also specifically because you're in your pyramid there in your book, Saurabh and Anupam, you mentioned that first fill in the stability part, then look at ambitions and all at a later stage, right? But given the way people commit financial mistakes, you sometimes wonder if people are actually mixing up ambitions with stability.
I think a clarity of thought, whether it's in investing, whether it's in your professional life, or whether it's with your personal finances, clarity of thought, thinking clearly about what matters and what doesn't, is obviously central for success. And whether you're living in Bangalore or Bombay or India or America, it doesn't matter. And a big element of clarity of thought is being able to simplify your life and simplify your goals in life, right? So simplification is not just relevant for professional success. Simplification is also relevant for personal happiness, because if your goals in life are themselves complicated and messed up, then prioritizing them becomes very difficult, right? So simplicity in thought, simplicity in your planning allows you to prioritize better, right? If you're able to prioritize what exactly you want from your work, from your personal life, and from your finances, it's easier to then plan for any of this, right? So one very common confusion I see in personal finances is a client on one hand will say, I want this portfolio to compound at 25% because I'm hoping that on the back of this portfolio I can buy a holiday home in Goa. And then 5 minutes later, the client will say, well, don't you think the market could crash on the back of COVID? So I'll say, sir, but you just said you're planning over a 5-year horizon to buy a holiday home in Goa. He said, no, I am, but I just don't want it to crash in the next 3 months, right? So that sort of dichotomy where the same investor who 1 minute is saying he's got a five-year horizon, and the next minute he's worrying about what will happen in the next 5 minutes, that dichotomy, that confusion, and as you put it, greed and fear, it arises from lack of clarity on what you're exactly investing for. If you're worried about COVID, right, and if you're really stressed about COVID, you shouldn't be thinking about that holiday home in Goa. If you're worried about the holiday home in Goa, then think the long game and invest accordingly.
And don't worry about COVID.
Don't worry about COVID. Most people dance between these polarities, and their mind is a constant struggle between, on the one hand, wanting to compound over 5 years, on the other hand, losing sleep about the next 5 minutes. Now, what a good financial planner, and the financial planner in chapter 9 of this book does is, he tells the two fictional characters in the book. One is Akanksha. She's a very successful senior vice president in an MNC company. And the second is Suraj. He's a rookie investment banker, hungry to rise in life. What the financial planner tells both of them is, if you're dancing between these sorts of aspirations, have a set of investments for your day-to-day survival, and then have a different set of investments for your holiday home and Goa. Right? Don't confuse your investments. Don't ask the same equity portfolio to deliver your day-to-day survival and your holiday home and Goa. No one investment can toggle between two conflicting objectives.
Beautifully put across. Beautifully put across. Is that why also I see in your book, one of the elements you mentioned is obtaining the balance between emotional and rational decisions? Because this mistake, what you pointed out, I can straight away relate to that. I've heard some people saying that too. What do I do about my investment? Should I just, because of the COVID, everything's going to fall apart? Should I, if you have a long-term 10-year horizon, why are you even worried about something that's going to go away in 6 months? Is there a classic case, Saurabh, of here are some emotions related COVID coming in and defeating the rationale? How important is it to get the best of both worlds when it comes to financial security?
So Rajesh, whether we like it or not, all decisions at some level are emotional, right? So I might say, as a professional fund manager at Marcellus, I am extremely practical in how I invest. But as we just discussed 5 minutes ago, there are no future facts. As we explain in chapter 4, there are no future facts, right? When I go to work on Monday, I don't know what the world will look like. And yet we have to invest, for thousands of families have to invest their money without any future facts. So at some level, all decisions are emotional. Where I think that the greater, a better way to think of the demarcation, a better way to think about the demarcation between decisions that work and decisions that don't, right? It's not emotional versus rational. It's decisions which are coming from a clean, uncluttered mind, and decisions which are coming from a confused mind, right? A clean, uncluttered mind will make sensible decisions in professional life, in personal life, and in this financial planning. And a cluttered mind will struggle with decision making in every facet of life, right? And therefore, decluttering your mind, building clarity of thought, right? Creating a clean mental framework, a frame of mind which allows you to think about things in a practical, systematic manner is super important.
Beautiful.
So I know most of us in day-to-day life say, well, don't get emotional, be rational. That's day-to-day parlance for saying, you're not being very sensible. But the real reason most people end up screwing up their thinking is because their mind is so cluttered with 65 different things to do and 25 different priorities that the mind goes into what's called cognitive overload. And once you're under cognitive overload, you're not going to make rational decisions in any facet of your life.
Beautiful point, cognitive overload. Anupam, I'm going to come to you for that one, because 6 steps to keep potential, what we talk about is not only about the financial elements. It applies to everything, every element of your life, doesn't it?
It does. So we've given so many examples there about how the 6 steps apply. I mean, it could be as simple as learning a new skill, or overcoming your fears. Take an example of an activity as basic as swimming. A lot of us probably don't have access to a pool, but let's say that you do, then you might be scared of water. So we've actually shown that one way to look at it to overcome your fears is to do what you're scared of most. Okay, provided it's safe enough and it's not something like jumping from a plane or something. But we're talking about normal activities. Something that actually makes you a healthier person, but you're not inclined to do it for whatever reason. So we're saying, listen, here is how you do it. And this is what even the greats like maybe a Matthew Syed and Bounce, the book, have told us. So first is overcome your fears. You could probably try, tie a floater around yourself, or you could take some kind of a device that doesn't let you sink. Start from there. Take baby steps. Hire a trainer. You don't have to learn everything yourself. Although I know that today's generation, some of them actually take a mobile phone or even a YouTube video and put it next to the pool and try. So whatever works for you. Let me not go into that. We've said, hire a trainer, maybe give him a little bit extra, and start with baby steps. So you learned how to float, now learn how to swim. First, you overcome that fear, and then you improve your performance. Now, this will apply to almost any field that you can think of. It could even apply to your work. Like I used to be an analyst, and now also a lot of my job does involve making, some amount of calculations and some amount of writing. And you need to do something that makes you uncomfortable, but ultimately increases your capacity to perform. And that's a framework that we've laid in the book.
Right. So, Saurabh, I just need to come back to you again on that one, because you mentioned the point of cognitive overload. I'm not able to see Saurabh. Yeah, there he is back again. You
I'm here.
mentioned cognitive overload, Saurabh. Is that why
Yes, sir.
you don't use a WhatsApp? Did I read that right in your book? You don't use a WhatsApp. You're not there on some social media accounts. That is the best example of cognitive underloading, right?
Yeah. No, so I try to keep my life as uncluttered as possible. You're right. I'm not on WhatsApp. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. Barring LinkedIn, I'm on not on any form of social media. I try to make it as hard as possible for people to reach me and for me to reach other people, and that frees up a lot of time. Remember, both for my family and for my colleagues and for my clients, right? If I'm perpetually on social media whacking out responses, my brain is in cognitive overload, right? And one point that we learned from the gurus who've informed a lot of this framework, that's the simplicity paradigm framework that's in our book, is you have to learn to focus, right? And I quote from Harsh Mariwala's section we've written in the book on Harsh Mariwala, the Marico promoter. We're big fans of his. So Harsh Mariwala says, I strongly believe that focus will lead to depth and depth will lead to excellence. Now, I can't be expected to build focus if I'm whacking out 100 WhatsApps a day, right? That's not focus. That's being a slave to technology. So a lot of people have asked me to do it, but I'm quite happy being difficult to reach. I'm quite happy being completely disconnected from social media.
I know, but then there's also one interesting point that you mentioned, which is very, very relevant in the whole success part we talk about, right? Meditation. I particularly, what caught my attention was the 100 to 0 principle. It'd be good to hear a bit about that, sort of 100 to 0. That's interesting. I want to try that myself, by the way.
Yeah, so it's actually the most basic meditation concept. Unfortunately, I'm not an advanced meditator, so that's why I still use 100 to 0, and it works for me. So effectively, what Jason Voss, the American fund manager, who wrote a lovely book called Intuitive Investor, which we read, and then we reached out to Jason, and he gave us a couple of superb interviews, which helped us write the chapter on meditation. He said that the main challenge that we face, right, when we try to meditate, right? First of all, why do we try to meditate? Because meditation, A, reduces stress, B, reduces blood pressure, C, reduces cortisol levels in your blood, right? And all of that makes you calmer, right? It just brings down your adrenaline levels. So he said, we asked him, how do you meditate? And he talked about this. And he then gave us the overarching principle. He says, what happens is our ego is so strong. For all of us, our ego is so strong that our egoic mind gets in the way of us being able to just pull our mind back. So what you need is to give your mind a simple trick, which basically distracts the mind, distracts the ego in a way. You give your mind a simple trick which distracts the ego and lets you pull back. So the simple reverse counting from 100 back to 0, the reverse count from 100 to 0, you can do it anywhere, a taxi, your living room, and on a plane. That simple 100 to 0 distracts the ego, and with the ego distracted, the mind basically comes back to yourself. You almost go into I would say, trance-like state. And what's remarkable, I found, as I learned this 7-8 years ago, is just 10-15 minutes of this, you feel refreshed. Just 10-15 minutes of this, you feel refreshed, and then you're able to concentrate better, think more clearly.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Anupam, I'll just come to you on the 3 essentials. We talked about the pyramid. Saurabh also talked quite a bit about that. Security, stability, and ambitions. So in common in Indian families, right? I mean, when I'm talking common, I talk a large chunk of the middle class families in India, right? With aspirations, and which makes up for a very, very large population, right? What constitutes security? What constitutes stability? And what should constitute ambitions?
So, when we take the examples of the 2 case studies that we have in the book, in case of Suraj, let's take the young person first. Security for him would be to establish a basic level of expense per month. Have enough income to pay off that for maybe a 12-month period or whatever it is. So first we come from there. The case study that we've taken there he has a mother, and that's it. She's a single mother, and his security comes from there. His stability then comes from making that basic into a little bit, expanded a bit to include some luxuries maybe. Now this On a practical basis, it could be paying your rent and then moving from, say, a further suburb to a nearer suburb to your office. In Bombay, we've actually shown how Suraj radically transforms his life by choosing a place near his work. And for a lot of us who are working there, it happened with me, for example. I used to stay 20 kilometers away from work, and I still did, till I was working there, I still did. So for a lot of us, the commute is a long distance, because the closer you stay to work, the more expensive it becomes. But at the same time, you also save on time. So that's a trade-off that a lot of people, have difficulty in making. I remember for me, when I had started my work, all my bosses stayed literally within 2 to 3 kilometers of work, and I used to be surprised at that. So you've got security, stability, and then you've got goals. The goals is, of course, what you want to do. And for a 25-year-old, he's looking forward to it at a 40-year-old level, where he says that I want to work for 15 years, build a corpus, and then have my startup. So for all of us, these goals at various levels tend to be different, and it would matter from people to people. In my generation, my parents, for example, security meant that the minute you start your job, you start an EMI. Okay, you have to buy your house. You have to necessarily buy your house, and it's a non-negotiable thing. Okay, now thankfully that entire concept has been uprooted and turned around. Thankfully, because there's more financial information available for us to know that with rental yields at just 2% and interest rates at 7-8%, it's a no-brainer. You have to rent. It gives you that much more flexibility, that much more stability. If you're moving from, if you're moving from city to city, country to country, why would you want to own your house? Why would you want to commit such a large amount upfront? Okay, but that's for a young person, for someone who's actually, believes that he's going to stay in India. And once he's put in that much of effort into building a career at a senior level, maybe a house makes sense. So I think that the goals differ from people to, but in general, security means having a basic layer of expenses to support and sustain yourself. Stability means taking it one notch higher, and goal is whatever ambition that you have in life later.
Absolutely. So two things over there, right? I'll come to Saurabh on this one. Saurabh, for you, does buying a home and using large EMIs, I know people go for 20-year home loans, and then, they're just perennially paying the home loan EMI month after month, year after year. And then 10 years down the line, they realize, I've come across many people like this, right? 10 years down the line, they realize, okay, let me prepay and close it. At that point, they're only paying the principal. They're not even paying the interest. They're going to lose more money in doing so, right? Should buying a home be a security, or should that be in a goal? A retirement home? What's a better way to look at it?
So the way to think about it is, if you're buying a home out of this concern that I need a roof over my head, you're buying a home because you somehow feel insecure about this whole concept, then I think that's immediate signal to you that you shouldn't be buying, right? Any decision in life, whether it's going for a MBA or buying a home or changing a job, anything which is grounded in insecurity is immediately a signal that you might be doing something which actually doesn't make any sense here. So for most of us in this country, rental yields are 2%. And therefore, for you to buy a home which is 7%, effectively you're borrowing at 7, 8, 9%, there has to be some compelling rationale, right? Now a compelling rationale could be, as it was in my case, a massive house price crash. So I migrated to India just after the Lehman Brothers crash. When I came in May 2008, I looked at house prices and my wife said, no way are we going to buy at those rates. But then 3 months later, Lehman Brothers went bust. And in the early months of 2009, house prices were smashed in Bombay. They fell 50%. And we looked at it and said, it makes sense now because rental yields and interest rates were similar. Right? Rental yields and interest rates are similar. It made sense to buy. But if I look at it today, it makes no sense to buy. Right? Your rental yield is 2%, your cost of borrowing is 7%. Now, if I buy out of insecurity, then I'm afraid it's not a very clever idea. So any decision in life, whether it's jumping to a new job, moving to a new country, choosing an educational qualification, anything which is grounded in insecurity, an investment in the stock market, anything which is grounded in insecurity, the simplicity paradigm tells us is not a clever idea.
I'll just add to that. You spoke about, Saurabh spoke about the rent versus buy decision for a house, which is massive because typically an EMI eats up a big chunk of your salary. If you look at something as simple as a credit card, our financial literacy there is still very poor. A lot of us revolve the credit card debt, and when you think at what are you spending it on, the chances are that you're just spending it on some lifestyle expense that you don't need. Declutter, So if you can just look at it and look at your credit card statement over the last 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, and see what have you really spent on, and then just narrow that down into a few basics. You don't need all of that. I mean, one of the best examples that I'd like to give is the Prime sale, the Amazon Prime sale, or the Flipkart sale. These online sales, they just bombard you with so many ads, and you feel that you have to go and spend for that. You feel that, and this is such a basic principle. So many people know it. Yeah, you get impulsive. And see, here's the thing: not buying saves you much more than getting the same thing at a discount if you don't need it.
Right.
If you really do you really need to buy a new phone every year? And just because it's at 50% off and you're getting it at 30,000, do you want to spend at 30,000 when you can actually spend zero? I mean, zero is less than 30,000, even if 30,000 is less than 60,000. And that's mathematics. It's not an insight given to me by God.
I get that.
So I just want to make that point out.
I know, great point, because I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I still remember my dad, my parents at the start of the month would give a list of the groceries, right? And he used to go to the nearby Kirana store and just give it to him, and he'd say, okay, shaam mein aake le jao. Right? But today, we walk into a supermarket and we pick about 30% of the things we pick up are not probably will be in that list. Right.
So it's the same thing. I mean, we speak about lists in the book. We speak about focus in the book. We speak about, cutting yourself off. If you're going to remain online all the time and bombard yourself with these ads, day sale and that day sale, honestly, your credit card bill is... Anyway, please go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So sort of the question I come back to again is that, you made a very important point about the real estate and other things, right? But there's a counter theory that will come in. Indians, Indian families traditionally have a fetish for gold, right? We've seen that over the years, not just craze, it's almost a fetish for gold. Gold from just a luxury, gold has become like an investment for them today. I just saw one very interesting meme that was forwarded to me, saying that 10 years ago, a husband bought a car for 1 lakh or for 10 lakhs, and that's worth 1 lakh today. And the wife bought gold for 10 lakhs, and that's worth much more today, right? So,
right.
I mean, that's a counter theory. We don't recommend people to rush towards gold, but unfortunately, that seems to be happening over the last few months. Will that confuse people?
Cars also, right? My car is 11 years old. It's banged up. It's cluttered, but it does it's beaten up. It does my job. Right? My job is to go to the kids' school, drop them in school. The car is perfectly nice. I don't need a new car. My phone is 6 years old. The screen is cracked. It's broken, but it does the job. I can talk to Rajesh if I want to talk to Anupam. So spending minimization, and similarly, you're right. I mean, purchasing gold, never understood it. The data is clear. At best, gold helps you meet inflation. Gold is not a wealth creator in our country. There's lots of false data which is published by vested interest, but there is nothing which suggests that over long time horizons, gold actually accretes to your wealth. It simply is an inflation. It's effective in that regard, but it's nothing more than that. And you just look at the enormity of how Indian households have been sold down the river. RBI data shows 95% of Indian households' wealth is real estate and gold, two asset classes which don't create any wealth. If 95% of people's investments are asset classes don't create wealth, how will you make money? Right? You're working so hard. You're working so hard, but 95% of your investments is in real estate and gold, two asset classes which cannot create wealth in our country, haven't done so in the last 20, 30 years. Right? Only 5% of Indian households' investments, RBI data shows, is financial assets. Right? And that 5% is what households now need to bulk up as they plan for exigencies like COVID, as they plan for retirement, as they plan for their children's education. You're not going to send your kids to college by melting your gold bars, right? It's unlikely that your kids are going to go to college when you go to melt the gold bars. You're going to send your kids to college by building a good portfolio of high quality stocks, Government of India bonds, and perhaps fixed deposits with respectable banks. Similarly, your retirement can't be funded by your melting a bar of gold every year, right? Because we've come from a country which was till 20 years ago an extremely poor country, right? And as we explain in the book, in the last 20 years, we've become 3 to 4 times richer. But the insecurities have stayed with us. And the insecurity drives a lot of our purchase behavior. It drives our investment behavior in physical assets, gold and real estate. And the insecurity is a destroyer of happiness. It's a destroyer of wealth. And a big part of the simplicity paradigm is shedding insecurity and moving towards a simpler, more spiritual, decluttered type of rationality.
Great point. So Anupam, I just want to ask you one more point on this one, right? I mean, we still, are we still, Indian families, are we still the savings mindset? We don't think about investing, because investing is one step ahead of savings, right? I mean, because we're still stuck in that savings mindset. And then, we have the fixed deposit rates, which are falling down to 5%, 6%, and they're only going southwards. And then we come back and say, this is not happening. We still have not got, I mean, have we got that culture of SIP still?
Well, the data seems to show that we have, right? Because we are at about 3 crore SIP in number, an average size of about 3,500 or 4,000, or about 3,000 a month. So that's about 9,000 crores per month, 8 or 9,000 crores per month going into the equity markets. This figure was literally zero 10 years ago. So obviously the campaigns by the mutual fund bodies, by the mutual funds themselves have at least created that awareness among us. So these are just the broad numbers that are out there. So the answer to the short answer to your question is yes. There is an increase in SIP as a concept for investment, and it's going into the stock markets. God alone knows now whether these guys will continue the SIP given the last 3 months. I believe the May and June numbers haven't really looked good. And at the counter, people who are now rushing stocks into a dichotomy, but I think over the longer term, this will even out. The answer to your question is yes. Thankfully, now there is an awareness of an alternate to invest in the form of mutual funds and in the form of an SIP.
So how do we convert that savings culture? Sir, I'll just come back to you on that, because how do we inculcate the investment mindset in a savings culture, if I have to put it in that one line?
I think this is the first step is, as we were discussing 20 minutes back, looking at your own ambitions, your own aspirations in life. Now all of us, myself included, struggle to be practical about what my aspirations are. And as I think you made a great point 20 minutes back, that many of us confuse our ambitions with our stability goals, right? Stability becomes ambition, ambition becomes stability, and becomes one old mess. And I think that therein lies the market for good investment advisors. So I sit on several committees, and I think SEBI's done stellar work in creating an investment advisory profession. It's a separate license. There are separate rules for it. I passed the regulatory investment exams. I'm an investment advisor myself, actually, and it's a good qualification to get for those who are in the profession. But for others who want to be practical about their financial planning, bringing in an investment advisor into your life, letting the investment advisor structure your financial plan, right? As both Akanksha and Suraj, the two fictional characters in our book, do in chapter 9, they bring in the investment advisor. And the investment advisor gives them a financial plan. The investment advisor says, invest X amount in large cap stocks, Y amount in small cap stocks, Z amount in fixed deposit and government bonds. And if you do this over the next 20 years, this is where you'll get to. I think that's what millions of Indian families need to do. The investment advisory industry in its infancy in India, but my reckoning is to grow, and these advisors hopefully become the planners of the financial planners for millions of middle class families as they toggle from being in the savings culture, as you put it nicely, to the investment culture.
Yes, absolutely. Good point there. I think in the next 20 years, we'll definitely be seeing those changes. So let me come to you meanwhile with another question. I know, you are a podcast host yourself, Anupam. So what kind of, from your own experiences, what kind of tough questions you've had from people in terms of financial, safety or mistake?
Wow. Yeah. So fantastic question. It's a huge list. I think one thing that people tend to confuse or rather mix up is personal finance is actually much more than just investments. It's basically income minus expenditure is equal to savings. So I think you need to just break that down. People need to understand each of those concepts before, and I still think that there's a lot of confusion in that. Credit cards, which is the expense part of the equation, is one great example. People don't know the rates at which they're revolving their debt. So that's one. Second is mutual funds. The fact that people like to just chase the highest performing fund, whereas if you just have a very simple framework of these SIPs and just let them run for 10, 15 years, you are going to compound your wealth any which way. So, and the third there, I think, would be how exactly a product works. So I think that awareness is still not there in a lot of people. I hope that my podcast, actually goes to solve that literacy thing. I think Saurabh is back.
Great. Yes, Saurabh, welcome back again. So you're talking about that, best practices for a salaried class.
Yeah, so I think that regardless of how much a family earns, right, the first priority has to be to build the security layer. We live in a country where there is no great social security program that the government will help us out with if something happens to us. And the simplest way to think about security is at any point in time, a family should have in fixed deposits and government bonds, high quality bank fixed deposits and government bonds, the next 3 years worth of living expenses. Whatever be the next 3 years worth of living expenses, it's worth having that in fixed deposit and government bond. That's the security layer, I think, addressed. For most families at our stage of life, where the kids are, in school, aspiring to go to university, the stability layer hinges around planning for children's education and planning for your retirement, right? And both of those are very quantifiable goals. So we know, every family knows that when the kids will go to college, you know what the outlay is, and you have to basically plan 10 years out, 20 years out, depending on when your children are going to go to college. And you also know when you'll retire. You also have a broad sense of what your living expenses will be when you retire. So that's the second layer. Children's education and retirement planning is the stability layer. Once your savings plan, your monthly savings plan addresses these two aspects, you're saving enough to give your children a good education and give yourself a secure retirement, only then do you then start thinking of ambitions. Ambitions being my proverbial holiday house in Goa, which never happens. Right? Hopefully, I think a few more books like the Victory Project, I might be able to get that holiday house in Goa.
Right.
But those can only come after the Mukherjee family has got a savings plan which will pay for our children's education and for our retirement. So the security layer, 3 years worth of money in the bank or in government bonds, 3 years worth of money, 3 years worth of outlay put in government bonds and fixed deposits. That's the security layer. The stability layer for most people in our strata of society is children's education and retirement. And the ambition layer is everything that comes thereafter.
Absolutely. Very beautifully put across. I'm pretty much sure your ambition will not just be a holiday home in Goa, it will be in Tasmania. I can bet that.
Well, actually, my ambition is to just keep writing books and to have more time to read. So the only thing I spend money on, and I hope others who are watching this spend money on, is books.
Wow.
I have no other expenditure. I don't buy clothes. I don't buy phones. I don't buy cars. The only thing I spend money on is books. And then in the pre-COVID world, we used to go on holidays once every 7-8 months. But honestly, a big part of my growing up years was realizing that spending money on anything other than books actually doesn't make any sense for me.
So you've been an absolutely experiences person, reading books or maybe enjoying some nice natural landscapes around you, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So the more time I have to read and the more time I have on to travel around the world, that will be my ambition. But I'm not there yet, and hence I'm grinding away at the wheel every day.
Wonderful, wonderful. Anupam, your key messages for families in this particularly.
I think it's a tough one there. I think take lessons from the book. Make your life simple. Try and declutter. Try not to be bombarded by negative news. I think that is one thing that a lot of us find challenging. They even call it doom scrolling. There's a word for it. There's a term for it. Doom scrolling. There's this absolute joy. So there's an old saying, laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. I'm afraid that's turned the other way around now. Be miserable and share the misery. But if you're happy, stay happy. Right. And I don't know why people want to share this misery. I mean, I absolutely have no idea when we know for a fact that three things are the best way to protect you. Wear a mask, wash your hands, and social distance. That's it. Live your life within those three things. And, God forbid, I hope that nothing happens to you, but if it does, then there are numbers, there are statistics. Saurabh has in fact written a very nice blog post on that, and be real about things right now. So first is remove that part of insecurity or fear that you have. It is normal. The entire world, humanity is fighting against this. You're not alone. Okay, that's the first part. Second, the book talks about simplify, specialize, spiritualize. Use this time, hoping that you have more time. Although now research says that people are actually working more in this lockdown and in this pandemic. But see if you can remove the time to focus on maybe a new activity, a new skill. Webinars have become very popular right now. You can maybe learn a language, learn a new instrument. Distract your mind. Distract your mind into an area that is more remunerative mentally and spiritually to you. So I think these two are things that I would that are helping me, and I'm sharing it with you right now. I'm sure Saurabh also has a few ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Saurabh, last words from you.
My ideas have always been around actually read some more. So I've kept my life as simple as I can. No social media. Spend weekends with families, with friends. Spend weekends reading, and Monday to Friday as well. Every day I try to spend a solid hour reading. And I have to prioritize, right? If I don't spend reading, and I'm whacking my brains out on OTT content, then I can't complain 10 years from now, saying, well, I didn't make the best of my life. I didn't write the books I wanted to write. I didn't read the books I wanted to read. So we all have, life gives us these windows of opportunity, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Time is precious. Time generally is precious. Time with our loved ones is precious. And wasting that on buying stuff online or wasting it in shopping malls in the pre-COVID era, it just felt a little ostentatious. So COVID has given all of us a great chance to reorder our lives, reduce our commute times. Each of us gets 2 to 3 hours extra because the commute has gone from our lives. We have a choice. How do we use that? And I think those choices of how do we use the extra time created by COVID tells us a lot about ourselves. As Anupam said, if we are using that extra 2 to 3 hours to spend more time slogging for the boss, that's very interesting. If we are using that to watch more movies on OTT, that's very interesting. And if we are using that to spend more time reading, that also tells us about ourselves. Life gives us the choices. How we use our rationality, how we use our faculties to make those critical choices determine the courses of our lives.
Beautiful points. Windows of opportunity is not just about making the right investments, but also making the right choices in life, as said there by Saurabh. All right, there were some fabulous insights coming in from Saurabh Mukherjee and Anupam Gupta. Well, like they all said, it's all about security, stability, and ambitions. And with discipline binding these three principles, all goals in life can well and truly fall in place. Thank you so much, Saurabh. Thank you so much, Anupam.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you.
Interacting. It was a lovely Saturday afternoon interaction, I must say. I've learned so much from this interaction. I'm going to walk away with it.
It's kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you all soon.